Okay, so picture this. April 3rd, 2025, you've got this hearing room in the U.S. Senate.
Right. Packed, I imagine.
And the commander of U.S. military operations in Africa, General Langley, a four-star general, he's there answering questions, standard stuff, corruption in Africa comes up.
Mm-hmm.
And then, bang, he names a specific person, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young guy who'd taken over Burkina Faso.
Yeah, the leader who just come to power.
And he accuses him right there publicly of basically hoarding the country's gold reserves to protect his own regime, not helping the people.
Wow. Okay. That accusation, made all the way over in Washington, D.C., must have landed like a bomb back in Burkina Faso.
A shockwave, absolutely. It caused this immediate intense outrage, not just there, but kind of rippling outwards.
It wasn't just political talk then. It sounded like a real direct confrontation.
Exactly. A flashpoint. You had these two figures, Captain Traoré in Burkina Faso, General Langley representing the U.S., clashing head on.
And they really embody these fundamentally different ideas about Africa's future, don't they? And its place in the world.
Totally. Sovereignty, who controls the resources, the whole legacy of colonialism, global powers jostling. It all came together in this moment in early 2025.
It really put a spotlight on those big struggles happening across the continent.
So to help you unpack this, because it's complex, we've really dug into the reports, the analyses, even what people were saying on social media.
Yeah, looked at it from different angles.
Our mission here is just to guide you through all those layers, the people involved, the history, the big power plays, what it actually means for people on the ground, so you can really get a handle on what's going on.
And maybe a simple way to think about it is like this. Imagine Burkina Faso is a town, and this town happens to have a really valuable gold mine.
Okay, got it.
Captain Traoré, he's like the local coach. Grew up there, knows the struggles, and now he's trying to rally everyone, the community, to take back control, especially control of that gold mine.
Makes sense. And General Langley.
He's more like a manager from this big global corporate league, headquarters far away.
Right.
His job is overseeing all the teams in the league, in this case, the nations of Africa, making sure they play by the established rules that, often tend to benefit the league itself.
So the clash is really this high-stakes game over who gets the gold, who makes the rules for the town, and can the local team actually go its own way, maybe even leave the league?
That's pretty much it. It's about control and destiny.
Okay, so let's start unpacking that. Let's look at the town's story first. The history of Burkina Faso. Why was it sort of primed for this kind of showdown?
Well, Burkina Faso, it's landlocked West Africa, and its history is just deeply marked by outsiders taking advantage.
It used to be French Upper Volta, right?
Exactly. And like a lot of places, its resources, especially gold, were often, extracted.
Yeah.
But the benefits didn't really stay home. Left a lot of poverty behind.
And you can't talk about Burkina Faso's history without talking about Thomas Sankara. He was this revolutionary leader back in the 80s.
From 83 to 87. Yeah, an incredibly powerful figure. His vision was all about self-reliance, national dignity.
He was pretty radical for the time, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He rejected foreign aid, started nationalizing resources. He had these lines that just stick with you, like he who feeds you controls you.
Wow.
His whole aim was for Burkina Faso to stand tall, use its own wealth for its own people, build itself up.
But that ended tragically. He was assassinated in 87 in a coup.
Yeah, and there's always been this widespread belief, this strong suspicion, that foreign powers had a hand in that coup.
Which must have left a really deep scar, right? A lasting suspicion of any kind of foreign interference, baked into the national psyche almost.
Absolutely. That suspicion is it's a crucial piece of understanding everything that follows.
And then things got even more chaotic later on.
Well, yeah. Fast forward a bit, the whole Sahel region got destabilized. The NATO intervention in Libya back in 2011, it had these huge ripple effects. Spread weapons, fueled militant groups.
Right, and that directly connects to the rise of jihadist violence in Burkina Faso itself, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Groups tied to Al-Qaeda, ISIS affiliates, they became much more active around 2015. And the cost has just been horrific. The UN figures are stark, something like over 20,000 people killed, 2 million forced from their homes just since 2015.
That's staggering. 2 million displaced.
And the government, well, they really struggled to get a grip on it, to respond effectively, which led to huge public anger, frustration. People were just desperate for security, for some kind of change.
And that desperation, that anger, that's the fertile ground for military takeovers, isn't it?
Precisely. It set the stage perfectly for someone like Captain Traoré to step in.
So let's talk about him. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, our local coach, born in 1988. So, yeah, super young to be a head of state, only 37 now.
And from a humble background, right?
Yeah.
Rural town, not elite.
Yeah. He joined the army in his early 20s. And importantly, he wasn't stuck behind a desk. He was out there fighting the jihadists up north.
So he saw it all firsthand. The violence, the failures of the state, maybe the limits of foreign help too.
Exactly. He got a real ground level view. And sources say he was really inspired by Thomas Sankara, saw him as the model for what Burkina Faso should be: proud, independent.
You see Sankara's ideas, that famous quote about being controlled by who feeds you, popping up again and again, clearly influenced Traoré and that whole generation.
So how did he actually take power? There was that earlier coup in January 2022, right, that brought Damiba in.
Yes, but Damiba also couldn't really turn the tide against the violence, and some people felt he was maybe too close to outside powers.
Which opened the door for Traoré. September 30th, 2022, he leads another coup against Damiba. He was only 34 then.
And his justification was basically that Damiba had failed on security, and those perceived foreign ties didn't help. Sources say it was pretty quick, relatively bloodless.
So who actually backed him? Who wanted him in charge?
Well, domestically, a big part was junior officers in the military. They were frustrated, wanted a new approach to the fighting.
But it wasn't just the military, was it?
No, not at all. Crucially, he had significant civilian support, especially from young people. They were just fed up with the insecurity, the poverty, that feeling of being exploited.
You saw that in the rallies right after the coup, yeah.
Definitely. And his image helped. The sources mention he lived modestly, captain's salary, drove an old truck. That really resonated with people tired of leaders seeming out of touch or corrupt.
Okay, what about international backers? There was talk about Russia, Wagner.
There was, and speculation about support from AES allies like Mali and Niger too. But, and this is important based on what we've seen, the evidence for direct involvement in the coup itself, the actual takeover in 2022, it's pretty thin, circumstantial. It seems more like those relationships solidified after he was in power.
Gotcha. And who was against him?
Predictably, the sort of usual suspects, France, the U.S., the regional group ECOWAS, they generally opposed the coup, called for civilian rule to return.
So once he's in, what does he actually do? What's the new strategy from the coach?
He moved fast, and his policies send a really clear message. Big focus on anti-imperialism, getting control of the economy, and shaking up security.
The anti-imperialism part, the big symbol was kicking out the French troops, right? February 2023.
Yeah, that was huge. Around 5,000 French soldiers, part of Operation Barkhane, this regional counter-terror effort. Traoré basically said, look, there are historical issues here. Colonialism, Sankara's assassination suspicions lingered.
And people felt Barkhane wasn't working anyway.
Exactly. The perception was it wasn't stopping the violence, maybe even prioritizing French interests like resources over protecting Burkina Faso's lives. Plus, there was just deep public resentment towards the French military being there.
And then he forms this new alliance, the AES.
Right, the Alliance of Sahel States. With Mali and Niger, also military-led governments that had pushed out the French, it was explicitly set up as an alternative to ECOWAS, which they saw as too aligned with the West.
Okay, and the economic sovereignty piece. The gold.
Yeah, Burkina Faso has a lot of gold, but historically, the profits often flowed out. So Traoré's government started nationalizing key mines, like Essakane in 2023.
And building their own refinery.
That's the plan. Approved for 2025. The idea is to process the gold in Burkina Faso, keep the value there. The government says they want to use that wealth, potentially billions, like $4 billion for schools, clinics, security, for the people.
And security-wise, besides the regular army.
He mobilized huge numbers of civilian volunteers, the VDH they're called. Reports say maybe 90,000 by 2025. And yeah, he also turned to Russia. Around 500 Wagner mercenaries reportedly showed up in 2024.
So how are people seeing him now? Is he popular?
It's really divided. He definitely has strong support, particularly among the youth. They see him as a nationalist hero fighting for the country. You see it all over social media. Hashtag support Traoré, hashtag Sankara lives.
But there are criticisms too.
Oh yeah. Serious concerns about authoritarianism. Sources mention journalists being detained, protests banned, elections getting pushed back, and human rights groups like Human Rights Watch have flagged concerns about abuses by those VDH volunteers. So it's a mixed picture. Hero to some, worrying figure to others.
Okay, let's bring in the other main player here. General Michael Langley, our global league manager, 4-star U.S. Marine general. born 63.
And his position is historic in itself, isn't it?
Absolutely. First Black American ever to reach 4-star rank in the Marine Corps. Almost 250 years of history. That's a huge deal, widely celebrated back in the States.
He's got a long career behind him, 38 years, combat in Afghanistan, Iraq.
And since August 2022, he's been heading up AFRICOM, U.S. Africa Command.
AFRICOM. Established back in 2007, its official mission is pretty broad: counterterrorism, stability, protecting U.S. interests, covers 53 African nations.
Big budget, too, like $2 billion a year. So, yeah, the global franchise overseeing its African operations.
And Langley's focus areas. Countering groups like Al-Shabaab, sure. But increasingly, it seems, pushing back against Russian and Chinese influence on the continent.
He travels a lot, visits allies, like that flintlock exercise in Ivory Coast in April 2025.
Yeah, but it's important to remember, AFRICOM itself is controversial in many parts of Africa. It's often seen as being there mainly to protect U.S. and Western interests, especially resource access, maybe not always aligning with what African countries themselves see as their main security needs.
And the Sahel region, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, rejecting Western forces, presents a direct challenge to him and AFRICOM's whole approach there, right?
A major challenge, yeah. These countries are essentially saying, we don't want your type of security partnership anymore.
Which brings us right back to that collision, the flashpoint.
That Senate hearing, April 3rd, 2025.
Langley's there, getting questions, corruption comes up, and he specifically names Traoré.
It says what exactly?
He basically says Traoré is using Burkina Faso's gold reserves not for the people, but, quote, to protect his junta regime.
Oof. That's a direct hit. It cuts right to the heart of Traoré's whole narrative, doesn't it? The idea that he's fighting for sovereignty for the people.
Totally. Langley's essentially calling him out, saying, no, you're just lining your pockets or securing your own power. Like that global manager accusing the local coach of stealing the ticket money.
And coming from the head of AFRICOM, aimed at a leader who's already anti-West and cozying up to Russia, that carries enormous weight.
It clearly shows U.S. concern, not just about coups, but about losing influence, about nationalization hitting Western companies like IM Gold, which operates there.
It's about the resources and the geopolitical alignment.
And the reaction in Burkina Faso, predictably furious.
A firestorm, yeah.
Yeah.
Sources describe just waves of outrage. People saw it as a neo-colonial insult, some outsider telling them their leader is corruptly managing their resources.
And it spilled onto the streets.
Big time. By the end of April 2025, thousands were rallying in Ouagadougou, chanting for Traoré, burning U.S. flags, AFRICOM out signs everywhere. Real anger.
And social media just poured fuel on that fire, I bet.
Oh, completely. X especially. It became this digital town square where the outrage just exploded globally. Hashtag support Traoré, hashtag AfricaMout were trending.
Any specific examples?
Yeah, people sharing posts, drawing comparisons like, what about U.S. hypocrisy regarding resource exploitation in places like the Congo? You had groups like South Africa's EFF jumping in, calling Langley's comments an imperialist tactic.
And then there was the racial angle directed at Langley himself.
That was really prominent. Because he's a black general, speaking against an African leader, it fueled these accusations of betrayal from some quarters.
The Uncle Tom in uniform label.
Yeah, that phrase popped up a lot on X, according to the sources. The framing was that he was serving white imperialist interests against African solidarity. It's a harsh critique, obviously.
But it reflects a certain perspective, right? That he's prioritizing the system over solidarity.
Exactly. It highlights just how complex these identity politics become when mixed with geopolitics and historical grievances.
How did Traoré's government react beyond defiance?
Well, Traoré himself doubled down on his earlier tough talk about being merciless against interference. But then, significantly, on April 22nd, 2025, the government announced they'd foiled a coup plot.
A coup plot? Where did they say it came from?
They pointed fingers at neighboring Ivory Coast, which is, a key U.S. ally in the region.
And the timing. Just weeks after Langley's accusation, and right before that big U.S. military exercise in Ivory Coast.
Exactly. The timing immediately fueled suspicions among Traoré's supporters. The narrative quickly became, see, the West is trying to overthrow him. No concrete proof emerged, mind you, but the suspicion was potent.
But Langley didn't exactly try to smooth things over, did he?
Not at all. He refused to back down. Quite the opposite.
He doubled down.
Yep. On May 13th, 2025, he publicly stated he would not apologize.
And his exact words were pretty striking.
Yeah, the quote was, "It is an insult asking me to apologize to Ibrahim. I am a 4-star general protecting the interests of the American government. He is brainwashing the African people, and he has to stop."
Wow. Calling Traoré's supporters brainwashed.
That just threw gasoline on the fire. intensify the backlash hugely, especially online. For many critics, it just confirmed their view. He cared only about U.S. interests, dismissed African perspectives, and it fed right back into that racial critique.
And just to clarify, there were some rumors online he'd apologized, but that's not verified.
Right. Some posts, maybe less credible news sites, claimed he did. But there's no solid evidence, and that May 13th statement directly contradicts it. Seems like misinformation spreading in the heat of the moment.
Stepping back from the immediate clash, this whole episode really just highlights the bigger game being played across Africa, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a perfect window into the U.S. Russia-China competition for influence.
Africa's just so strategically important. Resources, growing markets, young populations.
Everyone wants a piece of the action, or at least to deny it to their rivals.
And Traoré turning to Russia, bringing in Wagner, that's a clear move in this game.
For Russia, it's a chance to expand influence, push back against the West in a key region, maybe get access to resources down the line, secure political allies.
And China's playing a different game, but still a big one.
Yeah, China offers an alternative path. Massive investments, Belt and Road Initiative, infrastructure projects, over $60 billion since 2013. It gives African countries options besides the traditional Western partners.
So from the U.S. perspective, AFRICOM's job is basically to counter these rivals, protect U.S. interests.
That seems to be a major part of it. So when a leader like Traoré kicks out Western forces, nationalizes mines, potentially affecting Western companies like IM Gold, and aligns with Russia, that's seen as a direct threat to U.S. influence and interest in the Sahel.
And this alliance of Sahel states, the AES,
Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, that's their attempt to carve out their own bloc, resist Western influence, fight jihadists their own way, maybe pool their resources like gold and uranium. It's a direct challenge to AFRICOM and ECOWAS.
But amidst all this high-level maneuvering, what does it actually mean for the people living in Burkina Faso?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? It's not abstract for them.
Economically, there's obviously hope pinned on the gold nationalization. State media talks about funding schools and clinics.
Sure, there's that potential upside. But the reality is incredibly tough. The violence disrupts everything, including mining. Rural poverty is still extreme. And sources mention Western aid has dropped significantly, maybe 30%, according to UN data, which hurts humanitarian efforts badly needed.
And security. Those 90,000 VDH volunteers, is that working?
It definitely creates a sense of national pride, people taking action. State media might report successes in reclaiming territory.
But the violence hasn't stopped.
Far from it. Horrific attacks continue. That market attack in May 2025 killed 30 people. And those concerns about VDH abuses, especially against ethnic minorities like the Fulani, are real and documented by human rights groups.
So socially, it sounds like a mix of unity and division.
Yeah. Langley's comments initially seemed to galvanize support for Traoré, that national pride surged. But his crackdown on dissent journalists, protests, delayed elections, that creates fear and alienates people, especially maybe urban elites, diaspora folks.
And that alleged coup plot in April probably just deepened the paranoia and divisions.
Exactly. It's a nation feeling this surge of pride, taking control, but also deeply insecure and increasingly fractured internally.
And the symbolism around all this is just so powerful. Traoré consciously playing the Sankara card.
He really leans into it. The modest lifestyle, the anti-West rhetoric, the nationalization policies, it taps right into that deep Pan-African desire for self-determination, for leaders who fight for national dignity and wealth.
But it's a contested image.
Definitely. The authoritarian moves make people ask, is this really what Sankara stood for? So he's both our Sankara and, for critics, someone jailing dissenters, which feels like a betrayal of those ideals.
And General Langley becoming this symbol, fairly or unfairly, of divided loyalties for some.
Yeah, that Uncle Tom critique, however harsh, reflects how some see his position. Serving U.S. interests against an African leader fighting for sovereignty. It highlights those painful identity intersections.
And social media is just amplifying everything, shaping the whole narrative.
It's the digital battlefield.
Yeah.
It gives voice to movements like #SupportTraoré, but it's also where misinformation like those false apology rumors spreads like wildfire. It shakes perception massively.
So that initial analogy still holds up, doesn't it? The town, Burkina Faso, fighting the global league, Western powers, for its resources and identity.
I think so. The local coach, Traoré, versus the global manager, Langley. It's a fight for sovereignty, layered with history, global competition, and a very real human cost.
So what's next for Traoré? What are the big challenges ahead for him, based on what we've seen?
Well, he's got to deliver, right? Balancing any security improvements and economic promises with political openness, holding elections eventually.
Yeah.
That's a huge challenge.
And managing the Russia relationship while being isolated by the West.
That's a massive tightrope walk. Plus, how the AES, that Sahel alliance, performs will be critical for his regional influence in the whole sovereignty project.
His legacy is definitely up for grabs.
Completely. Polarizing figure, heroic Sankara successor for many, authoritarian strongman for others. That tension between he's our hope and heroes don't jail critics sums it up.
So wrapping this deep dive up, that clash between Traoré and Langley, it wasn't just words, it was really this collision of history, resources, power, identity, all playing out with Burkina Faso right at the center.
Yeah, it really crystallizes Africa's ongoing struggle for genuine self-determination in a world where big powers are always competing. You've got Traoré pushing for sovereignty, control over wealth, and Langley tasked with protecting his government's interest in that complex environment.
Understanding all this, hopefully, helps you see the forces shaping not just Burkina Faso, but the whole continent's future and how it fits into the world.
So, thinking about everything we've discussed, the history, the gold, the competing visions, the global powers, the impact on people, what do you think? What are the most crucial factors that will really decide who wins and who loses in this unfolding story for Africa?